Kale wiped the sweat from his brow as he crouched beside the broken starship engine. Sparks flew from his welding tool, and the smell of burnt metal filled the air. The scrapyard was quiet tonight, except for the distant hum of damaged ships settling into the cold ground. He had spent years fixing old machines, surviving on scraps and small jobs. Life was hard, but Kale knew how to make it work. Suddenly, a deep, shaking roar echoed through the abandoned factory. Kale froze, his heart thumping. That sound was not like anything he had ever heard before. It was low, powerful, and full of pain. He glanced around. The roar came from the far end of the yard, near a collapsed roof and a pile of twisted metal. Curiosity pulled him toward it, even though every instinct screamed to stay safe. When he reached the wreckage, his eyes widened. Beneath a large heap of steel beams and rubble, two massive shapes were trapped. Their scales glimmered in the dim light, colors shifting from deep blue to emerald green. They were Titan dragons, creatures so huge they could crush a ship with one swipe of their claws. One of them struggled weakly, shaking its enormous head, trying to free itself. The other whimpered softly, smoke curling from its nostrils. Kale's stomach tightened. Most people would have run, maybe even called the authorities, but Kale did not have that luxury. And besides, he couldn't leave them to die. He had seen enough suffering to know he couldn't turn away. "Okay," he whispered to himself, "let's get you out of here." He examined the wreckage, thinking fast. There was no way to lift those beams with his hands, not even with the old crane he had salvaged earlier. Then an idea struck him. He grabbed some thick cables and pulleys from his toolkit. Using the crane's leftover energy cells, he rigged a lifting system, connecting it to the heaviest beams. It was risky, and the machines groaned under the weight, but Kale adjusted the tension carefully. The smaller dragon looked at him with wide, golden eyes, as if it understood that he was trying to help. Kale felt a strange connection, a pulse that ran through the ground and into his chest. It was almost like the dragon was sending him a quiet message, "Hurry." His hands shook, but he didn't stop. Slowly, carefully, he tightened the cables. With a loud creak and a groan, the steel beams lifted just enough for the larger dragon to push itself free. The ground trembled as it struggled, and Kale jumped back, narrowly avoiding a falling piece of metal. Sparks flew again as the pulley snapped slightly, but he managed to fix it in time for the smaller dragon. Its wings were crumpled and torn, and it stumbled awkwardly, but Kale could see life returning to its eyes. He whispered, "Almost there. Just a little more." After what felt like hours, the last beam shifted, and both dragons were finally free. The larger one stretched its enormous wings, shaking off dust and debris. The smaller one nuzzled Kale gently, the touch sending a warm shiver down his spine. He laughed nervously. Okay, easy now. You're safe." For a few moments there was silence. The only sound was the soft rustle of wings and the hum of machinery settling back into the ground. The dragons looked at him, not with anger or fear, but with something else. Curiosity, trust, and maybe even gratitude. Kale didn't fully understand it, but he felt it deep inside. Night began to fall, painting the scrapyard in shades of orange and violet. Kale knew he couldn't just leave them here. He led them toward a hidden hangar he had built months ago, a place most scavengers didn't know about. It was large enough for them to move around, with old energy cells and water tanks he had repurposed. The dragons followed, careful and silent. Inside the hangar, Kale set down more energy cells to recharge the dragons' weak bodies. The larger dragon lowered its head, letting Kale inspect a torn wing. The smaller one leaned close, pressing its massive snout against his shoulder. For the first time in years, Kale felt something other than exhaustion or worry. He felt hope. He sat down on a metal crate, watching them breathe. Their scales shimmered under the soft lights, their eyes reflecting intelligence far beyond what he had imagined. Then, unexpectedly, the smaller dragon leaned closer and let out a low vibration. Kale felt it through the floor, a strange pulse that made his chest skip a beat. He didn't understand it yet, but it felt important, like they were trying to communicate something. Kale smiled, even though he was tired, scratched, and bleeding from small cuts. "I don't know what you're saying," he whispered, "but don't worry. I'll keep you safe tonight. Tomorrow we figure out the rest." The dragons curled up nearby, one wing draped protectively over the other. Kale could feel the warmth radiating from them, a strange, comforting heat that made the cold hangar feel alive. And as he watched them, he realized something. This night would change his life forever. He didn't know how or why, but he could feel it in the quiet pulse of the dragon's presence. Something was coming. And Kale was ready. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the hangar's broken roof, casting long beams across the metal floor. Kale rubbed his eyes and stretched, still tired from the night's rescue. When he looked around, the two Titan dragons were already awake, slowly testing their wings. The larger one flapped carefully, sending a gust of wind that rattled the tools on the shelves. The smaller one nudged a metal crate with its snout, sending it rolling toward Kale. Kale chuckled. Easy, easy. I know you're curious, but careful with my stuff. He walked over and patted the smaller dragon's snout. Its scales were surprisingly warm and it pressed closer, letting him scratch behind its massive ears. Kale couldn't help but smile. Despite their enormous size, they seemed almost gentle. For the next few hours, Kale fed them scraps of energy bars and purified water he had stored from old shipments. He watched closely as the larger dragon tried to eat a metal-framed crate like it was food, shaking its head when it didn't work. Kale laughed. Not that kind of snack. He broke pieces of old protein packs and offered them, and the dragons accepted, their eyes following him carefully. Kale noticed something strange. The smaller dragon would occasionally tap its claws on the floor, sending low vibrations through the hangar. At first he thought it was just a nervous habit. But when he placed his hand on the metal floor, he could feel the pulse clearly. It was deliberate, almost like a heartbeat or a rhythm. Kale frowned. What are you trying to tell me? He murmured. The dragon tilted its head, blinking slowly, and tapped again. Hours passed, and Kale found himself talking to them as if they could understand every word. You're hurt, he said, inspecting the torn wing of the larger dragon. We'll fix this. Don't worry. Using strips of metal and repurposed energy cells, he gently fashioned a brace for the damaged wing. The dragon stayed perfectly still, watching him with eyes full of trust. Kale realized something important. These creatures, these enormous beings, trusted him. Not many humans ever gained that kind of trust, not even other humans. As evening approached, Kale finally took a seat on the hangar floor. The dragon settled near him, the smaller one curling its long tail around his leg, the larger one resting its head near his shoulder. He could feel their warmth, the vibrations from their throats echoing through the metal beneath him. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the calm wash over him. Then the unexpected happened. The smaller dragon leaned even closer and sent a strong vibration through the floor. This time it was different, clearer, more urgent. Kale's eyes snapped open. He placed his hand firmly on the floor, focusing. The vibration felt like a message, almost like words he could not yet understand. It sent a shiver down his spine. He looked into the dragon's golden eyes and whispered, You have something to tell me, don't you? The larger dragon shifted slightly and lowered its massive head closer to Kale. Its eyes glowed softly, reflecting the fading sunlight. Kale could feel the connection deepening. He had never felt anything like it before, an understanding, a bond that went beyond words. Somehow, these dragons were not just creatures. They were thinking, feeling, and communicating in ways humans rarely experienced. Night fell, painting the hangar in dark blues and purples. Kale built a small fire from scrap energy cells, careful not to start a blaze. The dragons watched intently, their eyes glowing in the firelight. He talked quietly, telling them stories about his life, about the scrapyard, and about the strange, lonely world he had grown up in. The dragons seemed to listen, their heads tilting, occasional vibrations pulsing through the floor. Kale laughed softly. I guess you like stories, huh? Suddenly, a distant rumble shook the hangar. Kale froze. At first he thought it might be another collapsing building or a scavenger gang. But the dragons stiffened immediately, their wings tensing. The smaller one let out a low growl, and the larger one flared its nostrils, smoke curling from its mouth. Kale placed his hands on both creatures, feeling their energy, their power. Somehow they were warning him. Not danger close, not yet, but soon. Kale realized then that these dragons were not ordinary animals. They had intelligence, awareness, and a sense of purpose. And somehow they had chosen him as their ally. The thought made his chest swell. Humans were often underestimated, physically weaker than most creatures, overlooked in a galaxy full of larger, stronger beings. But here, in this hangar, he was more than just a mechanic. He was trusted. He mattered. As the night deepened, Kale leaned back against the wall, the dragons curled around him protectively. He felt their steady vibrations pulsing through the floor, a quiet rhythm that soothed his racing thoughts. For the first time in a long while, he felt hope. Somehow, against all odds, he had found allies, giant, powerful, and extraordinary allies. And somehow he knew this bond was only the beginning. Tomorrow he would need to learn more about them. But tonight, he let himself rest, listening to the soft, comforting thrum of two enormous hearts beating near him. And for the first time in years, Kale smiled and believed that maybe, just maybe, the impossible could be possible. The night was quiet, almost too quiet in the hangar. Kale sat cross-legged on the metal floor, the two Titan dragons resting nearby. Their scales shimmered in the soft light of the repaired energy cells, reflecting colors he had never seen before, shades that seemed to move and shift like liquid. He could feel the vibrations from the smaller dragon under his hands, steady but different than before. It was stronger, more deliberate, like it wanted him to understand something. Kale looked at the dragons, a question in his eyes. "What is it?" he asked softly. The smaller dragon tilted its massive head and tapped again, sending a pulse through the floor that tickled his bones. This time he focused, closing his eyes and letting the vibrations wash over him. At first, it was confusing, like trying to understand a language he had never heard. But then, slowly, patterns emerged. Images flashed in his mind. Cities made of light and metal, towers taller than the tallest mountains, creatures unlike anything he had ever imagined. He saw machines that could fly across planets, energy that could heal or destroy, and a map of the galaxy, dotted with secrets. Kale gasped and stumbled backward, his hand pressed to his chest. The dragons were showing him something incredible, something dangerous. The larger dragon moved closer, nudging him gently with its snout. Kale realized that the smaller dragon's vibrations were not just random, it was communication. They were trying to share a secret. A secret so powerful, it could change the balance of the galaxy. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of it all. "Your guardians," he whispered. "You're protecting something." The dragon's eyes glowed softly, and a small flame curled from the larger one's nostrils, almost like an answer. Kale sat back down, taking a deep breath. The secret they carried was enormous, more than he could fully understand. It was technology from an ancient civilization, left behind to protect life across the stars. A weapon. Maybe. A tool. Definitely. The dragons were the keepers, the guardians, waiting for someone worthy to learn the truth. Kale didn't know why they had chosen him, but deep down he felt it was because of his courage, his heart, and his resourcefulness, human qualities the dragons recognized as rare and valuable. As he absorbed the images and vibrations, Kale realized something else. This secret wasn't just dangerous, it was a test. If it fell into the wrong hands, countless worlds could suffer. But if used wisely, it could save civilizations, advance knowledge, and give humanity a place among the stars. The responsibility weighed on him like a mountain. He had spent his life fixing machines and surviving on scraps. Now he was part of something far bigger, something he never imagined. The smaller dragon leaned closer, its enormous eyes fixed on him. Kale reached out and touched its snout, feeling the pulse again. It was not just communication, it was trust. They trusted him with his secret. They were letting him in, showing him a future he could help shape. His mind raced, imagining what it would mean. The humans had always been underestimated, laughed at, and pushed aside by stronger species. But here in this hangar, the dragons had chosen him. Humans mattered. Humans could make a difference. Kale spoke softly, almost as if the words could carry through the vibrations. "I won't let this fall into the wrong hands. I'll protect it. I promise." The dragon's eyes softened, almost like they understood. The larger one lowered its head, brushing Kale's shoulder with a wing that was now partially healed. The smaller one coiled its tail gently around his leg, sending another steady pulse through the floor. The connection was stronger now, more intimate. Kale realized this bond would not break easily. But even as he felt the warmth of trust and understanding, a shadow lingered at the edge of his thoughts. Whoever had left this technology behind would not remain silent forever. And there were beings in the galaxy, ruthless and patient, who would kill to possess it. Kale's chest tightened. He was no warrior. He was a mechanic. Yet somehow, fate had placed this secret, this responsibility into his hands. And for the first time he understood that being human was more than strength or size. It was courage, cleverness, and the ability to choose what is right when everything else seems impossible. Night deepened, and the hangar fell silent except for the dragon's breathing and the soft hum of the energy cells. Kale sat in the center of the floor, the secret vibrating beneath him, and let himself think. Tomorrow he would need to plan, to prepare, and to learn more. But tonight, he allowed himself to feel awe, to marvel at the creatures beside him and the future they had revealed. For the first time in his life, Kale felt like part of something extraordinary. The dragons were no longer just creatures to rescue. They were allies, teachers, and guides. And the secret they shared was more than just information. It was a call to action, a challenge, and a gift. And Kale knew deep in his bones that his life, and the lives of countless others, would never be the same again. He leaned back, resting his head against the cool metal wall, feeling the vibrations of the dragons beneath him. The pulse was steady, calm, and yet full of promise. Kale smiled. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He had been chosen. And he would rise to meet it. Kale woke early, the hangar quiet except for the steady breaths of the Titan dragons beside him. Sunlight streamed through the broken roof, casting long golden streaks across the floor. He had spent the night thinking about the secret they had shared. The images, the vibrations, the warning, they had all pointed to something bigger than anything he had ever faced. But he didn't have time to dwell. Danger was coming. He stepped outside the hangar and scanned the horizon. Smoke curled from distant shipyards, and a faint hum vibrated through the ground. Kale's stomach tightened. He had heard rumors of an alien faction, ruthless and well-equipped, who would stop at nothing to claim powerful technology. And now, with the dragon's secret, they had a target. He could feel it, their arrival was near. The larger dragon stretched its wings, sending a gust of wind that rustled the metal scraps around him. Kale ran his hand over its scales. "We'll be ready," he said softly, though his voice carried a hint of fear. He knew this wouldn't be easy. They were massive creatures, but even dragons alone couldn't face a fleet of advanced warships. Kale had to rely on brains, not just brawn. He ran back into the hangar, gathering tools, old energy cells, and scrap machinery. His mind worked quickly, devising traps and decoys, using what he had learned from years of fixing ships and building defenses. Every bolt, every wire, every piece of metal had a purpose. He rigged pulleys that could drop heavy beams onto invaders, created small drones to scout ahead, and set up energy fields that could confuse sensors. It wasn't perfect, but it was clever, and clever could beat brute force. The dragons watched him work, curious and patient. Kale spoke to them as he worked. "We need to work together. I set the traps, you use your strength. No unnecessary risks." "Understood." Both dragons tilted their heads as if nodding in agreement. Kale smiled. Their trust in him was incredible, and he felt it returning tenfold. Humans might not be the strongest, but with courage and quick thinking they could survive against the odds. By evening, the sky darkened with clouds that didn't belong. They were not natural, they were part of the alien fleet, moving silently across the horizon, massive ships glinting with weapons Kale had never seen. His heart pounded, but he didn't panic. He checked the dragons. The larger one flexed its wings, ready to take off. The smaller one shifted its weight, sending a low vibration through the hangar, a warning and a signal. Kale nodded. Time. The first ships arrived, hovering above the scrapyard like predatory birds. Laser beams glinted in the darkening sky. Kale pressed a button on a small console, activating his traps. Heavy beams dropped, hitting the nearest ships and throwing the formation into chaos. The aliens fired back, but Kale had anticipated this. The energy fields distorted their sensors, making targeting difficult. Drones zipped around, drawing their attention and dodging attacks. Meanwhile, the dragons acted with precision. The larger one swooped low, crushing smaller attack ships under its claws. The smaller dragon fired bursts of flame, aiming at key machinery on the alien vessels. Kale felt the vibrations through the floor as if the dragons were guiding him, letting him know where help was needed most. Every move was synchronized, instinct and intelligence working together. Despite being outnumbered, Kale and the dragons pressed on. The aliens had firepower, but humans had cunning. Kale led them toward a valley where the terrain could be used to their advantage. The dragons followed, their massive bodies twisting and turning through the cliffs with surprising agility. Kale triggered a series of pulley traps, sending massive boulders rolling into the alien ship's path. Explosions lit up the night sky, throwing debris everywhere. The battle raged for hours. Kale's hands were raw from pressing buttons and adjusting machinery, but he refused to stop. The dragon's breathing echoed in the valley, steady and strong. They were enormous, terrifying, and yet gentle with him. Together they were a team, and somehow they were winning. Finally, the alien fleet began to retreat. Kale couldn't believe it. They had been outnumbered, outgunned, and facing creatures the size of mountains. Yet, human ingenuity combined with dragon might had turned the tide. Kale sank to the ground, exhausted but elated. The dragons landed beside him, their wings folding gently around their bodies. The larger one nudged him lightly with its snout, a silent gesture of respect and thanks. Kale laughed, shaking his head. "I can't believe we did it," he said, voice trembling with relief. The vibrations from the smaller dragon pulsed gently beneath him, almost like it was saying the same thing. He realized then that humans, though often underestimated, could stand against impossible odds when they used their brains, courage, and heart. Night fell fully, leaving the valley quiet. The alien ships were gone, at least for now, and the hangar was safe. Kale looked at the dragons, their eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. "We did it," he whispered. "But this is only the beginning. There will be more threats, I know it. And next time we need to be ready." The dragons seemed to understand, their vibrations steady and reassuring. For the first time, Kale felt the weight of responsibility not as a burden, but as a challenge he was ready to face. The dragons were more than allies. They were family, mentors, and partners in a fight that could decide the fate of countless lives. And together they were unstoppable. The morning sun rose over the hangar, casting warm light across the metal floor. Kale stood at the entrance, watching the dragons stretch their wings, feeling the pulse of their vibrations beneath his feet. The air was calm, almost peaceful, but he knew this calm was fragile. The galaxy was vast, full of dangers and mysteries, and the secret the dragons had revealed would draw attention again. Yet for now there was a moment to breathe, to reflect on what had happened, and what it meant. Kale remembered the first day he had found them trapped under the rubble. He had been afraid, unsure if he could help. But he had acted, using his hands and his mind to save lives bigger than he had ever imagined. And in return, the dragons had trusted him, opening their world and revealing their secret. He smiled faintly. He had never thought a simple mechanic could be part of something so extraordinary. The dragons moved closer, brushing against him gently. The larger one lowered its head, and Kale rested his hand on its warm, shimmering scales. The smaller one coiled its tail around his leg, sending soft vibrations through the metal floor. It was comforting, grounding. He realized then that this bond was more than friendship. It was a partnership. Together they could face challenges no human alone could overcome. Together they could protect something far greater than themselves. Kale thought about the secret the dragons had shown him, the ancient technology, the map of civilizations, the possibilities for the future. He understood now that it wasn't just power, it was responsibility. Humans had always been underestimated. Other species saw them as small, weak, and fragile. But humans had something else: courage, creativity, and the ability to make choices that no one else could. That night, the dragons had shown him a future where humanity could rise to meet its potential, if they were willing to fight for it. The sound of a low vibration caught his attention. The smaller dragon sent a message through the ground, calm but insistent. Kale knelt, placing his hands on the floor. The vibration painted a picture of distant worlds, of people struggling and needing protection, of threats that were patient and powerful. Kale nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "We'll help. We'll be ready." The dragons seemed satisfied, settling near him as if to say they trusted his choice. Kale spent the next few hours preparing. He repaired damaged energy cells, reinforced the hangar, and built small observation drones to monitor the skies. He wanted to be ready for anything. But as he worked, he realized something else. He wasn't preparing alone. The dragons were beside him, not just as companions but as guides. Their strength, intelligence, and loyalty made the impossible possible. By afternoon, the hangar hummed with quiet energy. The dragons rested, watching Kale work, occasionally sending soft vibrations that he had learned to understand. Each pulse was a reminder that they were not just creatures he had saved, they were teachers, showing him the depth of connection possible between species. Kale smiled at the thought. Humans could build ships, machines, and cities. But the most powerful thing they could build was trust, courage, and friendship. Suddenly, a shadow passed over the hangar. Kale looked up to see alien scouts on the horizon. They were smaller than the fleet that had attacked before, but there were more of them, and their intent was clear. Kale felt a thrill of fear, quickly replaced by determination. He had learned much since the first attack: traps, planning, strategy. And now he had dragons. Together they could face anything. The larger dragon flared its wings, and Kale felt the familiar vibration thrumming through the hangar. The smaller one hissed softly, a sound that somehow carried both warning and reassurance. Kale ran through the mental checklist he had made: drones ready, traps set, escape routes planned. And then he stood tall, knowing that this moment, like every challenge before, would test humans not by strength alone, but by courage and ingenuity. The alien scouts approached, but Kale and the dragons were ready. Using a combination of clever traps and the dragon's might, they turned the tide again, showing that even when outnumbered, humans could prevail. Kale watched as the aliens retreated, defeated and confused. The dragon's eyes met his, glowing softly, and he felt a deep sense of pride. Humans might be small, but when they stood for what was right, they could achieve the impossible. As night fell, Kale sat with the dragons atop a ridge near the hangar. The stars stretched across the sky, endless and bright. He felt the steady pulse of the dragons beneath him and realized that he was not just a mechanic anymore. He was a guardian, a partner, a human capable of shaping the galaxy in ways others had never imagined. The dragons nudged him gently, as if to remind him that they would always be by his side. Kale leaned back, gazing at the horizon. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Humans had earned their place among the stars not through brute strength but through heart, courage, and wisdom. And together, with dragons as allies, there was nothing they could not face. Kale smiled, feeling a warmth he had never known before. The secret the dragons had shared had changed everything, not just his life but the future of humanity. And for the first time he believed that humans, small and underestimated though they were, could truly become legends.